So please give a warm welcome to Tom Glaser.
Thank you. First off, I'll start off. This is what I generally do for schools. So first I'll give you a brief overview of the years in Europe from 1933 to 1945. Adolf Hitler, a Nazi, was voted into power in Germany in 1933. He wanted to conquer all of Europe and eliminate all of the Jewish people and those of other minorities, including those of other races, sexualities, and religions. He created a systematic plan, first by slowly taking away their freedoms, and then the mass killing began. So during the years from 1939 to 1945, the Nazis murdered 6 million Jews and another 5 million of other minorities. So 6 million, about 10 times the population of Vermont, or 2/3 of all the Jewish people in Europe were eliminated. So if you think about it, the person on either side of you might be killed. And this is what's known as the Holocaust, and this is my family's story during those years. So this is a picture of my family in about 1965. That's me, about 15 years old. My older brother George, who was 18. My parents, Victor and Daisy. And a map of Europe during those times. So both of my parents were Holocaust survivors. Of the 5,000 Jews taken from Prague, Czechoslovakia, to the Lodz ghetto in Poland in 1941, so of the 5,000, only 261 survived, and only 19 couples. Now, I'd like to tell you why I'm speaking to you today, because speaking to groups is out of my comfort zone. But I feel like I should be doing what my father would be doing if he was still alive, and that's sharing my family's story so that this part of history is never forgotten. Like the saying goes, never again. I'm sorry if some of what I'm going to share with you is hard to hear. Some of it is gross and truly disgusting, but the fact of the matter is that it was. It's not a pretty story, but there's one good thing. My parents survived it, and now I'm here. So this is the story of my parents and some relatives who, unfortunately, I never got a chance to know and love. Here's a picture of the Glaser family in 1914. This is my father, about the age of 7. His father, Zygmunt and Ludmilla, who you'll hear a little bit more about. His father had 4 brothers and a couple sisters. Here are a couple my great-grandparents. Here are a couple cousins you'll hear about from my father. You'll hear about this one and one of these 2 uncles of my father. I'm not sure which one it is. So I'm the first one in my family to be born in the United States. I was born in 1950, about a year after my parents emigrated to the U.S. My parents grew up in Prague, Czechoslovakia, in nice homes with loving parents. My father was quite good at soccer, played the violin, and later in life he taught himself how to play the game of bridge. Since I've got an older audience today, how many of you know the game of bridge? I figured I'd see a few more hands than what I do in schools. Usually I get one, and usually it's the teacher. But anyway, bridge is a card game, and it's not a game of luck. To do well, you need to look at the whole situation and plan a strategy to do well. My father got to be quite good at playing bridge and played for the Czech national team. And later on in life, he would play in tournaments all over the world. So the Germans invaded and took over Czechoslovakia on March 15, 1939. My parents were dating at the time. Knowing a little bit about what was happening in the world, they decided to get married, which they did exactly 1 month later, April 15, 1939. So they got married in hopes that the Germans would not separate families. Of course, that didn't work. My father tried to get his parents to leave the country, but my grandparents refused. They said that they were too old to start over somewhere else. And since they were old, what could happen to them? They had their life, their family, their business, home, and they refused to leave. And my father refused to leave without his parents. So over the ensuing months and years, the Nazis began restricting Jews from more and more of society. Simple activities like going to a park, restaurants, theaters were not allowed. They were required to wear the yellow Star of David on their clothing to publicly reveal themselves as being Jewish. So as the Nazis began taking these freedoms from the Jews, honest, law-abiding citizens like my father started doing not-so-law-abiding things. My father, along with one of his uncles that I pointed out in the picture there, started smuggling money and valuables of his own and for others out of the country on trains. He would go to the train yard late at night, put a package underneath a train, and then tell his cousin, who was in Paris at the time, on what train and train number the package was under. This worked very well for quite a while. I believe about 10 months, maybe a year. But eventually they got caught. And my father and his uncle went to a German Gestapo prison. They beat him quite badly while interrogating him. Little did he know that this was nothing compared to what was ahead. He spent 10 months in jail. Eventually, his father had to come up with a lot of dollars and Czech crowns to get him released. I will now play you the first of 3 videos of my father speaking when he came to my middle son's class at CVU in 1994 and spoke for about an hour and a half.
All Jewish families had to prepare a list of all their possessions, including what they had in bank vaults. Then the Nazis notified us that they prepared 5 transports, each to contain 1,000 Jews. My parents and my wife's parents and her brother, and my wife and myself, we were designated for the 2nd transport. In our transport, there were mainly doctors, lawyers, and wealthy business people. We had to bring along the list of our possessions and were allowed 2 pieces of luggage for each person. I had a $100 bill and went to my place of birth, Bočice. That's around 40 miles south of Prague. It's a small town. And I buried that money in a small metal container near a tree. 3 days before our departure, we assembled in a big hall. Soldiers were patrolling around the building, and inside there was only one officer who held a revolver in his hand. He was turning the finger around his finger. Then each family was called separately, and we had to sign an affidavit that all the possessions which we enumerated in the list and all the jewelry, etc., which was in our vaults, is being given without any force by us to the German state. We slept on the floors and used the luggage as pillows. We had to walk to a station which was not too far, each carrying our luggage. I helped my mother, but she had a terrible time keeping up with the procession. We were put on a train, but did not know where it was going. I remember only that we arrived in the Lodz ghetto in Poland on October 26, 1941. On our arrival, the ghetto had already about 150 to 200,000 Polish Jews. We were brought into a school where we slept on the floors. After about 2 weeks, big trucks came in front of the school, and soldiers came into the school where we slept and took all small children and babies and threw them into the trucks from the second and third floor windows, killing all while their mothers watched and screamed in anguish.
I'll let that sink in for a moment. Remember the $100 bill. I'll get back to it later. So the conditions got worse and worse. Many suffered and died from starvation and diseases like typhus, tuberculosis, pneumonia, typhoid, dysentery, and other infectious diseases. Very little food was available, and what there was awful. My father used to say that in normal times you wouldn't feed it to pigs. After about 4 or 5 months of starving and not being able to do anything about it, and not seeing the end of his suffering, my uncle Fedor, my mother's younger brother, who was about 16 years old at the time, wanted out of there. So he volunteered to get on one of the many transports out of Lodz in hopes of better conditions. And my mom's parents went with him as well. They wouldn't let him travel alone. They were never heard from again. So my mother, who was only 20 years old, lost her brother and both of her parents. On August 18th, 1942, so about 10 months of being in Lodz, my father's father, Zygmunt, passed away. My father dug a hole and buried his father. Of course, he didn't have a casket to put the body in, so he found some pieces of wood to cover the body to try and preserve it. That's all he could do for him. About 3 weeks later, there was something called the selection. Unfortunately, my grandmother, Ludmilla, was selected. She was taken away, never to be seen again. So now it was just my parents that were left. Over the next couple years in Lodz, my parents continued to struggle to live. Very little food and lots of disease. My mother got typhus and had a 104 temperature for a period of 3 months. If you have 106, you die. My father was hospitalized with pneumonia. The doctors didn't think that he would survive. My mother said many times that if my father wasn't so determined to survive that she didn't know whether she would have. My father would say the Germans might win the battle, but that he would win the war. He was very stubborn, clever, resourceful, and had an incredible willpower. So in August of 1944, so almost 3 years in Lodz, they were taken to Auschwitz. Auschwitz is one of 44,000 concentration camps that the Nazis, concentration camps and ghettos that the Nazis constructed. There in front of Dr. Joseph Mengele, wrong way, this guy, and I won't say gentleman, you met their destiny. If you went to his left, you were killed in the gas chambers. If you went to his right, you were safe. The men were in front and the women were in back. My father worked his way to the back of the men, and that way my mom could see that she went to the same side as my father. And knowing that she went to the same side, sorry about that, she knew that if there was any way to survive what was ahead, that my father would find a way. And that gave her the strength to continue. I'll just give you my simple distinction between a ghetto, concentration camp, and an extermination camp. A ghetto is like the worst slum in a city you've ever seen. Filthy, dirty. My father's reaction when they got off the train in Lodz was it was the filthiest place he had ever seen. My father said there was 150 to 200,000. However, the ghetto is surrounded by a fence, and the Lodz ghetto was approximately 1 mile by 1 mile. So you can imagine how crowded it was. Housing was approximately 7 to 9, 10 in a room. I later found out that there was only 20% of the housing had plumbing. So you can imagine how nice that is. Then a concentration camp is like a prison. You're separated from your family and you don't have any of your own possessions. And if you're strong enough and lucky enough, and you survive the slave labor and tortures that you're subject to. An extermination camp is just that, where you're taken to be murdered. So in Auschwitz, the men had to go into a small room, take off all their clothes, then a young German soldier whipped them from one end of the room to the other. Then they were given their clothes, which consisted of a striped shirt and pants, no underwear, wooden Crocs. However, those Crocs eventually got holes in their soles, so now they're walking barefoot. Their housing, wooden bunks to sleep on, no blankets, never a shower. Bathrooms? I don't think so. How about just a hole in the cement or a bucket on the floor? No toilet paper, no water to drink, no heat, no air conditioning, nothing. So from Auschwitz, my mom was taken to a camp called Gross Rosen. The camp had only women, and they worked in an underground munitions factory. It was a short walk from the camp. She was eventually liberated on May 8th, 1945, so almost 3.5 years. I don't know much more about what happened to my mother during that time, because she did not talk about it. All I heard all my life was my father had it much worse. Not that anybody had it easy. So I just did this on Google Maps because I was curious as to where my father had been. He was in 9 camps. So he started off in Prague, up here to Lodz in Poland, down here to Auschwitz. Then I'll tell you about a 3-day train ride through Vienna, way down here into southern Germany. Over here is Dachau. All these little dots are just names of little towns where there were other camps where he was taken. And eventually I'll tell you about a hunger march here from Turkheim back here to Allach, and then he was brought back to Prague. So in September of 1944, so a few weeks after they were in Auschwitz, they selected 640 of the strongest men who were told that they were going to go on a 3-day train ride. As you know, this is not Amtrak. This is a crowded cattle car with no facilities. So they gave them food that was to last them for the 3 days. When my father would tell the story, he would go, yeah, they gave us food. And he would hold up his fingers like this. A few pieces of bread, a few slices of salami, and some margarine. That's it for the 3 days. So what did my father do? He ate it all in the beginning. That way, for once, he could feel a little bit better. And what else? Nobody could take it from him. So the 3-day train ride, well, they expected to get fed when they got to the camp after 3 days, not until the next day. So the 3-day train ride brought them to Riedlow in the southern part of Germany. He spent approximately 4 months there until January of 1945. Some of what he survived was getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, marching 5 miles, doing hard physical labor like building secret factories for the Nazis or roads or railroads, then another 5 miles back, returning at 8 o'clock at night. Day after day after day, it didn't matter what the weather was, hot, cold, snowing, raining. So what was happening? Many of the men were dying every day. 10 to 20 of them would die every day. Then my father had to dig the mass graves to bury those that died. He would have to carry the naked bodies over his shoulder and place them in the graves. However, before he could place them in the graves, he had to check their mouths, their teeth, to see if they had any gold or silver fillings. Then he would have to pull those teeth out and give them to the guards so that they had the gold or the silver. At this point, that's awful, but it was nothing compared to what he had seen and done, I guess. He buried 256 fellow prisoners, friends of his. I heard that number all my life. After the war, he would travel twice a year to Europe on business. And when he did, he would make it a point to go to Riedelo and say Kaddish at the cemetery. Kaddish is the prayer, the Jewish prayer recited in honor of the dead. He took me there once. It was an incredibly moving experience. He did say that there was one nice guard. One time while he was delivering coal to the officers' cabins, he passed a guard, and the guard whispered in his ear that in cabin number 18, there was a bowl of soup on the desk. Have it. If anybody saw the guard doing this, he would have been shot on the spot. In one of the desks in one of the offices, he saw a German newspaper. So he quickly looked at the headline, and he saw that the Germans were approaching, and that gave him a little hope that maybe the end was near. In 1987, my father took me, my wife, and our 3 boys to Europe. One of the places he wanted to show us was where he had been during the war. So he brought us to Dachau. Have any of you been to any of the camps? It's huge. He took us to where the gas chambers were. I couldn't believe it. He told us of the stench when the bodies were burning. Then he brought us to the bunk rooms where they had stayed. Have any of you been to Dachau? So you can tell me if I'm right on this. I don't know if you remember seeing the bunk room. Yeah. The way I remember it is, it was a room about maybe 4 feet by 6 feet. In it were 3 bunks about this wide. There were 6 men assigned to each room. So 2 to each bunk, right? On the floor was a bucket for when nature called. When the bucket was full, one of the men had to take the bucket and run with it to the end of the hall. If he spilled any of it, which undoubtedly I'm sure he did, he would have to take his bare butt, get down on the cement or the dirt floor, and wipe it up. During the day, if they weren't outside for their roll call or getting the little bit of food that they might have gotten, all 6 men had to sit on the top bunk, hunched over. There was maybe this much room, am I right? Skin and bones all day long on a wooden bunk. And if you doing nothing all day long. Doing nothing, and if you knew of my father, doing nothing is a torture. So one of the worst things my father said was one day a water truck came to give them showers. It was a cold day in February. They had to strip naked, get a quick spray, and then get their clothes. So they're walking barefoot on the ice. I will now play you the second of the 3 videos where my father talks of that final hunger march from Turkheim eventually to Allach. It's approximately 60 miles. I don't have to tell you how far that is. I don't know about any of you, but in my younger days, I don't know that I would make it that far. After 3.5 years, this is April of 45, so after 3.5 years of being about 90, 95 pounds at that point, I don't know how he did it. I'm just glad that he did.
On the 24th of April, 1945, we started the hunger march from Turkheim. Soldiers were leading the way. More of them were in the middle of the procession, and some were at the end. We had to carry their suitcases. I believe that we might have been 100 prisoners and about 10 soldiers. While we were marching, other soldiers in tanks were driving from the other side and purposely hit the procession, killing about 10 or 12. We and even the soldiers did not get any food. Suddenly, the soldiers ordered us to stop walking, and as I was in front, I saw that they were calling for food, indicating that they would not continue to go if they don't get it. They made us sit alongside the road, and after several hours, a small truck came with some food. The soldiers ate their portions, and then they gave us a small piece of bread with soup. I was among the few who were supposed to divide the food among the rest. Suddenly I got a big smug in my face, simply because a soldier wanted me to be on his left rather than on his right. But one thing I remember, this was the very last beating I got. After we were stopped about 4 to 5 hours, they ordered us to continue. It started to get darker, and we were passing Landsberg. On the outskirts of the city, there was a little empty house in the middle of the field, and the soldiers slept in the house. We were sleeping on grass outside. Suddenly, it started to rain, and we continued to sleep. The next morning, we continued through Felsenfeldbruck and arrived in the dark in Dachau. We were standing in front of the gates for at least 2 hours until we had to continue because there was no space for us. After another 1.5 days of forced marching, we arrived in Allach. We were brought into a very big building, and there were a lot of people.
So they arrived in Allach soaking wet and slept on the cold concrete floors. But my father said they slept very well. They were so exhausted. After a night of bombs flying overhead, the German soldiers left the camp and the American soldiers came into the camp. Finally, Liberation Day, April 30th, 1945. 1,290 days. I would say that the hardest thing my father would talk about was when the Americans came and freed them. When they were finally liberated by the American soldiers, they were shocked to see how emaciated and starved the prisoners were. And they immediately gave them their food, which were things like chocolate and salami. See a lot of heads. You know where I'm going from here. My father somehow knew that he shouldn't eat all of the fatty foods that the soldiers were giving them, and he begged the others not to eat too much. However, many of the now free survivors did not listen to his advice. And it turns out that there's a biological response that the body has when being reintroduced after starving for so long that can be lethal. And it was not known until after World War II and is now called refeeding syndrome. So the result was many of these now free survivors died from this refeeding syndrome. My father could often talk about the many horrors that he witnessed during the Holocaust. But when he talked about those that died, friends of his, he would tear up. My father was then brought to a hospital for 3 weeks to gain some strength and get deliced. When my father would talk about the lice, he would go, yeah, there were hundreds of them on us, jumping from one to the next. So I'll now play the, if it works, I'll now play the next excerpt where my father talks about being returned to Prague.
The day came to go home. American soldiers brought us on trucks until Pilsen, and from there we went to Prague on a train. We arrived in Prague, Smíchov, which is a suburb of Prague, at 6 o'clock in the morning. We were waiting until 7 o'clock to call somebody. We had no money, but everybody wanted to give us Czech crowns so that we could call. At 7 a.m., I called my friend the builder. There was a big hello. But all I wanted to hear was whether my wife survived the Holocaust. I got the wonderful news, she's waiting for you.
So my father went to where my mother was. Shortly after their incredibly joyful reunion, they went to where my father had buried the $100 bill, and they found it. They changed it on the black market into Czech crowns, and with that they started to build their lives together. My father got back into business, which was buying and selling feathers and down. My brother George was born in Prague in January of 1947. All was going well. And then the Czech Communist Party came into power on February 25th, 1948. And they could see the writing on the wall. My mother said, "We missed one train. We're not missing the next one." Somehow my father found somebody to give them false documents and show that they were Polish Jews. This man arranged for them to get on a train of Polish Jews heading for Israel. They got off the train in Germany, in Stuttgart, made their way to Frankfurt. And there they found somebody who they knew very well to get them visas to come to the United States. So this was a couple that was taken on the same second transport from Prague to Lodz, and then the men and the women, you know, they were separated in Auschwitz, but the men and the women were together almost to the end. The other couple, each one of them differently, but was freed a few months before my parents. They could have gone to a few countries right away, but they wanted to come to the U.S. However, they had to wait 9 months because the U.S. was only allowing 2,000 Czech refugees to come. And about a year later, me. So I'd like to tell you something that I call my stick story. This is something that I lived with for about half of my life, or it bothered me for about half of my life. So when friends, relatives, neighbors would come over to our house, I'm born in 1950, they would find out or hear that my parents survived the Holocaust. This is only a few years after they survived. They've heard about the Holocaust. They wanted to know some things that they might have gone through. So my father might say, and I'm the little kid in the next room, 3, 5, 8, when you don't think your kids hear or they're listening to you. And here and there, I overhear this story many, many, many times. So my father would say, sometimes when they're outside by their roll call, the guard might say, you, and you, step forward. We're going to give you a stick. You're going to beat him until he's dead. You don't do it, I'm going to give him the stick. He's going to beat you until you're dead. Neither one of you does it, I'll take the stick and I'll beat both of you until you're dead. So all my life I hear my father saying this story, but I never could get up the guts to ask him, did he ever do this? Did he ever kill anybody? Obviously he wasn't killed. Then on that trip to Dachau, we were walking from the gas chambers back to the where the bunk room was that I described, going past one of the many, many foundations. I don't know, it seems like there are 50 or 100 of them. Just the foundations are there, the buildings are collapsed. And we stop. And my boys are about 12, 11, and 6, and my father starts telling this story. He tells the story, and I finally finally get up the guts to ask my father, Dad, did you ever do this? Were you ever picked? And he goes, thank God, no. And I just broke down and cried. I didn't realize what I've been living with all that time. So like I said earlier, my mother really didn't say too much about her years during the Holocaust. When I was a freshman at UVM, my mother was 48 years old and she committed suicide. Many years later, a close friend of hers told me that she might have survived the war, but that she was a casualty of it. Dealing with losing my mother at the age of 19 was one of the hardest things that ever happened to me in my lifetime. I feel like I had a great childhood. We did many things together as a family. In the wintertime, we went skiing every weekend, every vacation. My brother and I were quite good at ski racing. My brother came in 5th in the Junior Nationals one year. I came in 2nd in New York State, both my junior and senior year of high school. Raced against Bobby Cochran, not too far from here. Knew the Cochran family very, very well. Great people. In the summertime, we would go boating and water skiing, which I still love to do today. Last summer, I went 41 times. happy about that. However, the Holocaust was always in the background. Never knew what we could ask and what we couldn't ask. We were always expected to finish whatever was on our plate. To this day, I rarely leave anything on my plate. If I take it, I eat it. So here's a picture of my father at the age of 75, about my age. Everybody see a resemblance? Usually I see some nods. With our 3 boys at our house in Shelburne. And I have 2 pictures from Thanksgiving. I'll explain why. So here's my oldest son who lives in St. Paul, Minnesota. His wife, our 2 granddaughters. She goes to the University of Chicago this year. She's 19. She's 16. This family, it was her grandmother and her grandfather that went through the Holocaust with my parents. So we always celebrated together. There's another picture from 22. I'll get to that later. My middle son, who was the only one that could slow my father down long enough to get him to come up and tell his story. His wife, they live in South Burlington. My youngest son, his ex-wife, and our grandson, who was 10, they just moved in with us this past August so that he could go to schools in Shelburne. They came from California. Had a great time with him, teaching him to water ski this summer and snow ski. He's doing great. And I show you this picture from 22, and this is Ron and Barbara. So it was Barbara's mom and dad that went through the Holocaust with my parents. And he had a bad back this year. That's why they weren't up here and in the picture. So Barbara, since we both lost so many relatives and family, she's like a sister to me. We call each other brother and sister. We saw them most of the time, every weekend. These are some documents that I got from the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. The historian there was nice enough to sit with my wife and I for about 2 hours and give us a lot of information, a lot of his family history that we nearly put together, which we didn't know. But the Germans kept incredible records. If I start over here, you have my father, and these are just some of the records. We have like 10, 12, 15 documents on every person, including grandparents and whatever. So here's my father, his date of birth, where he lived in Prague, X meaning October 21st on the second transport, his number, taken to lodge, the same information on my mom. And then my father, my father, Victor, his parents, his names, mom's maiden name, some of the camps, where he was, what dates, camps, etc. And on my mother. And that's about it. And I just wanted to explain, if you want to hear more stories that I don't get to today, I was interviewed by a couple sisters. They do a podcast called Wild Side, and you can see it's spelled CIDE, and they do it on homicides and suicides, and they wanted to do one on a genocide. So they found me somehow. They're not from around here, and they wanted to do it on the Holocaust, and so they interviewed me. And on the bottom you can see movie, I hope. Well, we have a screenplay that's written. If anybody knows anybody that makes movies, producers or anything, please let me know. There's a classmate of ours from high school that saw a letter that my father had written after the war, and he goes, "Wow, this should be a movie." And he, along with my wife and I, over the last 4.5 years, have put together a screenplay which is ready to be made. So, and I'd love to take questions from any of you.
So many questions.
A lot more of my parents' story, I'll say amazing story, comes out with the questions. Anybody?
I have one from earlier on your talk. If your father had pneumonia, mother had typhus.
Typhus.
Yeah, he was in a hospital. They had hospitals.
Well, and the ghetto is like is like a city. It's like a town. There are doctors. There's, yeah, I know. I always felt like,
I thought
Really?
they were just like the palace,
Really?
You would think, yeah.
you know, I mean, and if that happened in a concentration camp, they would just leave you there to die, or kick you hard enough until you did whatever, you know. But the ghetto is yeah, kind of run like a little city. Not one you want to visit,
I know
but
Art Spiegelman.
Hmm?
I know Art Spiegelman. You know Art Spiegelman. You don't know Art Spiegelman?
Mouse.
Oh, do you know of? Mouse.
Yes.
He did a graphic novel, 2 volumes. He grew up with parents who had survived the Holocaust. And his mother also committed suicide when he was a teenager. And he's famous. He got a Pulitzer Prize for his work. So I'm thinking the movie, the screenplay, contact Art Spiegelman.
you got that, Jill?
Okay.
Did your parents have any kind of interaction with Israel? You know, the Jews there, the settlement there, was there any desire to move there after the fact, or?
I don't think so. I don't think we haven't. I don't believe we have any relatives there. I know my father went to Yad Vashem. Recently, in November, we went for the first time actually to Israel, and we went to Yad Vashem, and I don't know if any of you've been there, but they have that room with they have the names of, I think they're up to about 5 million of the 6 million Jews, and I was able to find my father's parents' names in there. I didn't have enough time. They were closing. It was on a Friday, so they were closing at 1 o'clock because of the Sabbath, and I didn't have enough time to, by the time we got to that part of it, to look for my mother's parents or her brother.
Your dad also had a cousin in the United States that they grew up like brothers, so that's why they came to New
Yes,
York.
that's why they came to the United States.
What is that again? I missed that.
My father's cousin that he smuggled stuff to, he was in the United States. And the other thing, possible reason, he had done business with people,
Yes.
really probably all over the world. Well, and
In New York.
eventually
He had
all over the
somebody.
world, but he had somebody in New York that he did business with. And when he did business after the war, he was like, well, what happens if something happens in this country? Let me try and get some money out of the country just in case. Well, of course it did when 3 years later when the Communist Party came into power, and he would have lost it all, which they did. They lost everything they had there, like I like to say, twice. So when he would sell merchandise to a customer in New York, he trusted him. He would invoice him for a little less than the merchandise was worth, and he trusted him to put the difference in a bank account for him. So he had something to start with when he got to New York. I kicked myself. I never asked him how much.
Where in New York did you grow up in New York?
Yes, Roslyn Heights on Long Island,
Right, okay.
and my wife Jill grew up in Mineola.
In Mineola, okay.
We went to the same junior high school and high school. We've known each other
many
since
people-
7th grade.
How many of your peers had parents that were Holocaust survivors?
Growing up, I didn't really know of any. Right?
No.
We didn't
No.
really know of any. And I've heard some stories afterwards.
Yeah.
The letter that I spoke about, he wrote a 24-page letter about 4 months after he was freed in August of 45 to his cousin, who was in the United States at that point, because he wanted to tell him what happened to other relatives, other friends, or brother or sister of his cousin, etc. And so he gave him, pretty much step by step what happened.
I grew up in Plainview,
Oh,
and there were many people, many of my friends whose parents were affected, and also couples that still had their numbers on their arms. So it was more. There were probably more Jewish people there.
Nobody talked about it.
Nobody-
At
My-
that time,
at
people
my-
didn't talk about it.
My grammar school, I had 100 kids in my class, 98 were Jewish, one Protestant, one Catholic. I thought the world was all Jewish, and here and there's a Catholic. No? Her grammar school was maybe 60% Jewish, something like that, so our high school was the two. I mean, it was mostly Jewish people.
Yeah, for us
Um,
it was 50. It was about 50-50. 50 Christian, 50 Jewish. Yeah, and I'm a little older than you are. So, yeah, interesting. How? I have friends that are dear friends, and their parents having to deal with it. They live with it daily, still, and we're older. How does that affect? How does it affect your life, your present life?
I feel very grateful to be here. You can see the emotion when I say it. And I try and tell the students when I tell them the story. And I say, listen, if you're ever having a bad day, you didn't get what you wanted on a test, your team didn't win, whatever happened, just think about that. It could be worse. Be
And during
grateful for what
COVID,
you be grateful for what you do have. So the older I am, the more grateful I am that they made it through and that I'm here and have a fabulous life.
How did you come to Vermont?
Well, I was a ski racer growing up, and I went to UVM to be on the ski team, which I was. And then when my mom died, which was January 22nd, so the very beginning of my second semester, so I go to Long Island, and then I got the flu, and I kind of missed the first, I don't know, a week or 10 days of the second semester, and I was feeling like I was the only one to ever lose a parent, and totally in the dumps, and kind of burnt out from racing and being on a traveling team and keeping up with school, and missing 10 days at the beginning of a semester was all I could take. So I stopped racing then, and but we got married between my sophomore and junior year, and we lived up here for a couple years and said we'd rather live up here than Long Island, and we stayed. And then I started the business, Burlington Foreign Car Parts, BFCP, and after graduating, about a year after graduating, had that for about 46 years, sold it in 2019. That's how I'm here. And I'm glad I did, or we did.
It was interesting that your father was so open about talking about his experiences, and I mean, a lot of people I hear about won't, like your mother wouldn't at all. So I wondered if you had anything to say about that.
If what?
If you had any comment about how he was able to do that, or...
My father was so tough. I mean, you never saw any emotion out of him until he was older. When he was speaking here, he was 87. The last 6 years of his life, he had Alzheimer's. He died when he was 93. If it was a year earlier, he would have spoken for an hour and a half without looking at any notes, in multiple languages, without repeating himself. He was amazing that way. I mean, just his mind was incredible. I mean, and he was, and when he would take the time, he wanted people to know the story because he was afraid people weren't getting the real story. So he wanted to tell them his story. He never really sat down, my brother and I mean, my parents never, probably because my mother said, don't put them through it. I'm sure I would have been crying. Who wants to tell your kid and watch them cry and go through what you might have gone through? I never really heard the story from the beginning to end until much later. There were some things that I heard when my father came up to CVU that I'd never heard before. I never really heard this story from the beginning to end. And then we had that letter from him.
That we found
Afterward,
after
but
he
I only got
died.
that about 4 years,
Yeah.
had it translated like 4 years after he passed away in 2000. So I couldn't ask him anything after that.
Is all of this information written down anywhere? You can't lose this. Your family needs to keep that. Is it written down
Yep.
somewhere? Is it published anywhere or available? Or?
I mean, the
Not yet.
letter we have, it's not really
Yeah.
published, right?
But the whole history, the whole story of your family
Mhm.
needs to be remembered.
Mhm. I'm hoping that movie gets made.
When you went back to Prague, were there any Jewish people from the city left
From,
Prague?
but there are Jewish people
No,
there.
now, but back when your parents, did they have anybody to go back to? Or did they
He
Um,
talk
knew
about it?
They
business.
lived
Some-
outside of Prague.
He knew a business person, and he did have another family that wasn't Jewish.
There was another family that wasn't Jewish, where he had left his grandmother's clock, like a wind-up, clock, which we now have in our house in Shelburne, which my father was so happy to get in 1988 when they became democratic and he could take something out. He was thrilled to be able to have that. It
Did
was the
you
only
go-
only piece of anything that he did have.
Did you go back to Prague to the Jewish quarter? Were your parents living in the Jewish quarter, or were they living outside the city before the war?
They were in the city. I'm not sure exactly where. I know I saw the synagogue where my father was bar mitzvahed,
Well, he had a storefront.
and he had a storefront just
In
down the
Prague.
road from there. When he was in feather and down business, he was also in the skins business before the war. After the war, he wasn't in the skins business. But he and his father and his father's father, father's father. I was the only one that broke the chain. Mainly because my father didn't want to see brothers getting into the business together, and my brother showed more interest in the feather business than I did, and he learned languages better than I did. So he kind of thought my brother would be in it. But unfortunately, my brother got sick with mental illness at the age of 19, and he was in and out of hospitals for about 10 years and eventually committed suicide at the age of 30. That's another story. He was amazing.
Well, your parents are amazing.
Yes.
To
Yes.
have survived that beyond traumatizing
Mhm.
experience. I'm wondering if your father ever spoke about how he psychologically made it through. How do you survive that?
He just had such a competitive spirit, like what I said, a determination, and he was clever here and there.
But he never spoke to emotionally how he made it through.
Well, I mean, he always spoke about having a determination to. I mean, I think that's what put competitive spirit. My brother and I were ski racing. If we finished second, why didn't we win? I car raced for a while. Okay, there's 40 cars out there, and I come in third, and that's not too bad. Well, why didn't you win?
I see. That kept him going. I'm going to survive.
Yeah. I mean, he had that. He would say, they might beat me, but I'm going to win.
Wow.
He just had that competitive spirit. I mean, many people just gave up,
Yeah.
as you know.
Who wouldn't?
As you know,
Yeah.
went either keeled over or, I mean, on that final hunger march, he's kind of knowing that they're moving him around because the Americans are pushing the troops and, the camps from here to there and so on. And, he kind of knows this and, and people are, and his friends are giving up and there's like trying to coax them on. Come on, a little more, you made it this far.
Did he ever say anything about feeling that he was lucky to survive, or have any survivor's guilt?
I never felt like I heard any guilt. Did you feel like he was
No.
lucky? No, I don't think so.
Not that other people would think he was lucky. No,
Yeah.
no.
Well, you had to have some luck.
But if he,
Yes.
You
Oh,
had to
yeah,
have some luck.
yeah,
If
you
he
had
was
to
one of
have
the two
luck.
that they pointed
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I'm not here.
So, did your brother commit suicide before your mother?
No,
No.
after.
So, I wonder.
Part of maybe why my mom did, because she was, my brother was in and out of hospitals and, that trauma. He was diagnosed as schizophrenic, given shock treatment. He would not know friends. It was awful. But then he was too good to be in as my mom said, he was too good to be in a hospital and too bad to be out. He would have good times and bad times. What happened is he was selected as with one of the top 25 in the country to train and get to the hopefully become on the Olympic team, where he was in Vail. This was his freshman year at Dartmouth. He was practicing for the downhill and fell. In downhill skiing, you're supposed to have a non-stop run before you actually take a full run. Well, anyway, he never got the non-stop run. The next day, he's feeling a little bit pain in his back before the race, and he goes to the infirmary. They give him something. They think that threw off his timing a little bit. And when if any of you know downhill racing, if there's a bump, you're not supposed to go off the bump because then you catch air and you'll slow down. So you try and jump before it or pre-jump, and you just go over the knoll. Well, they say his timing was off, and he launched himself at 60, 70 miles an hour. There was a picture of him, which we have in the Denver paper, skis and sky. And he dislocated his right shoulder, his left elbow, and has cracked his right elbow. Couldn't feed himself, couldn't take himself to the bathroom. His shoulder never healed well. For like a year and a half, and then eventually the doctor, that very famous doctor, and I can't remember his name, who operated on Joe Namath's knee, operated on the shoulder and repaired it about a year and a half later. It took about 5 or 5.5 hour operation, sewing this back together and that back together, and it was never the same. He would always test how strong he was healing by doing arm wrestling with me, and I could beat him, which was unheard of. Normally it would be like, you go ahead, Tom. And I'd start, and I'd be rolling across the floor. But anyway, so he got into smoking marijuana and taking LSD, and went to a campus policeman his freshman year. Oh, before that, while he was training in Vail, he was practicing actually faster than Billy Kidd and Jimmy Huga. Any of you know the names?
Yes.
Came in second and third in the 64 Olympics.
Why didn't he win? No, I'm kidding.
It gets really clear how your father survived.
And my brother's goal was to win the gold in the Olympics, not just to be in the Olympics. I mean, it was to be. Well, anyway, not being able to ski and so on, he got into drugs, and then he went to a campus cop at Dartmouth, where he was there on a full scholarship in the fall of his sophomore year, and said to the policeman, "What would you do if I told you I had marijuana in my room?" The cop goes, "Nobody in his right mind tells me that." So we brought him to the infirmary, and they sent him to New York, to a psych hospital in New York, and that's where they gave him shock treatment, and it was, like I say, it was he was in and out of, I don't know, 5 or 6 hospitals over 10 years and eventually committed suicide.
It seems,
And you can tell, it still bothers me.
I'm imagining you've done this many times.
Up to
So-
about 95.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'd have a box of tissues and I'd be losing it while I'm doing it.
So it occurs to me that, obviously what you're doing is about preservation of memory. And I wonder, particularly with the young people at the schools, I'm interested if you could reflect on, that audience. And when you tell the stories, you tell this story to them. What's your do you have any reflections about memory and how, what you're trying to do, tell your story and how they're receiving that? I wonder if there might be
I
something.
get the nicest reactions. Like I said, I'm not a public speaker. At a dinner party, I'm the one who's quiet. This is not me. How it started was, I was at a Yom HaShoah service, or whatever you want to call it, at the library in Burlington, and they had lit candles, and the gal next to me goes up, and she happened to be a teacher at CVU that teaches a Holocaust class. And then afterwards, she lit a candle and said what she does, and then afterwards she said, "What's your connection to the Holocaust?" So I said both my parents were survivors. And, "Oh, I would love for you to come in and speak to my class about it." And I'm like, ah! Well, 2 weeks later, she helped me put together this presentation. She said, "Do you have any videos?" And whatever, and I did. And anyway, so I started doing it. And I just got the nicest thank you notes and the nicest reaction, and the kids come up to me and thank me and tell me, "Wow, you put a family with those numbers." They hear the numbers, they read and it's like, okay, wow, 6 million. You put real people in those 6 million, and it's like, whoa, all right. And come home and say, all right, I guess I'm going to reach out and see what other school I can go to. And then through the Vermont Holocaust Memorial Group, we've gotten some leads. Like that's where I got the lead to come here. I've done it to some other groups, but mostly in schools. I mean, I would say, I don't know, maybe 10 other places I've done it, but mostly in schools.
How long were they in the ghetto?
And
what was their?
What's that?
How long were they in the ghetto, and what was?
Well, the ghetto, almost 3 years. And one of the reasons why my parents lasted in the Lodz ghetto for so long and weren't taken away earlier is my father went to the German, Germans in charge, and he would say, you've got this doctor or this accountant doing hard labor. He could really help you in the office doing this or that. And he kind of arranged for people to do different things, and I think that's what saved them for as long as they did. And then the Lodz ghetto was being closed down, and that's when they moved on. You mentioned the numbers on the arms, so I'll tell you a story. My parents did not have numbers on their arms. Anybody know why? Most people don't. I didn't know till a few years ago when I found out. The reason they don't is they were there in 44, and they stopped in like 43, about a year earlier in Auschwitz, putting numbers on their arms. And so I'll tell you the story of why sometimes it was hard to ask my parents a question. So I remember probably hearing it in Hebrew school or somewhere, or maybe in school, I'm not sure. I like to think that I wasn't too old, maybe 10, 12 or something, when I came home, and I'm like, "Mom, Dad, you were both in Auschwitz, right?" And I'm sure I said it the wrong way. And I said, "How come you don't have numbers on your arms?" Like it was some kind of gift. My father's reaction was, "Thanks a lot." Like, all right, I won't ask anything else. That's my father was amazing, but I like to joke, he was the world's worst teacher. If you asked him a question, was like, well, you don't know? It's like, no, that's why I'm asking. But that's the way he was.
How did you manage, how did the family manage to retain the old pictures of your?
I think they probably gave him to that family. It was a schoolmate of my father's, from a gal from like 3rd grade on or something that he knew from like 8 or 9 years old.
They weren't Jewish.
What?
That wasn't Jewish.
Yeah, that
So
wasn't
maybe
Jewish.
they-
Yeah. Wonderful family. Some of them have been here
Mhm.
at our house. Wonderful people.
Was their home still there when they got back?
I'm not sure. I don't think they got their home back. They got some housing from the Czech government, but I don't think they got their home back. That other couple got a building back. Now that other couple, see this hotel? Have any of you ever been in Prague?
Yeah.
Recognize it? On the main street? It's like the
Grand
Waldorf Astoria in New York, or, it's the hotel. Well, her parents,
Barbara's mother's family.
Barbara's
owned that.
mother's parents
Yeah,
owned that hotel.
yeah.
It didn't matter who you were.
Is that Old Town Square?
Hmm?
In Old Town Square?
That's
It's
not
on the
in
main street.
It's not in the
Yasislava,
old-
I can never remember how to say it.
Europa no.
But it's on the main street in, at the head of the street is a building with, I think they still left, places where.
They didn't get it
bullets were-
back.
They didn't get that
No,
back.
she did
but
not
they
get it
got-
back,
Got back an
no.
apartment building, but much later.
Yeah,
Uh,
Yeah, you don't get it back.
but the
no,
urns are
they-
still
they-
there
I
that
don't-
she
did they
used to
get-
hide around when she was a
Yeah,
little girl.
behind the urns
She
in the
would-
back, in the urns.
Yeah, she's like, when you go there, look, you
Look
know.
for the urn in the. I mean, it's
So
just a
that's
beautiful
the one
place.
across from the clock.
Yes, the clock is up this way.
Okay.
That,
Okay.
if you look down from the clock, partway down on the right side,
We
that hotel.
We ate there.
Yeah, it's a coffee house.
And she used to run,
Yes, that's what she
her mom
said,
used to
go-
run the
yeah.
coffee shop. After
Yeah,
the war,
that's-
she ran the
yeah.
coffee shop.
Yeah, we're very close.
Oh,
Yeah.
so Thanksgiving, I forgot to say that they came to the United States on Thanksgiving of '49.
Yeah,
2 months before I was born. So that's why Thanksgiving, we always take the picture, we always get together. Because Thanksgiving, I think I've missed maybe 5 now over the years with Barbara. She's a few years younger than me. And,
They always come to
parents
Vermont
will always,
now.
they
Yeah.
always come to Vermont now.
Her
We
parents always came.
Yeah, her parents came up. After that, we would always go down to New York,
yeah.
and we would have 2 Thanksgiving dinners, one with Jill's family and one with.
I'm wondering if your father was still alive when there was all the Holocaust denial news going on. I don't know what president or what group, and if how he reacted to that. If he ever reacted to that. Talked about
But
it.
I don't really know when that started. It probably started the day after it ended, right?
Yeah.
Still
True.
going
Um,
on.
Yes.
And it's still going on.
Yeah.
And Holocaust distortion, which they say is worse than denial. Denial, at least they say that there's evidence,
Proof. Yeah.
indisputable evidence that there was. But when you distort it, or it was it was the Jewish people's fault, or, for whatever they changed the story. That's kind of harder to prove, I guess, than whether it happened or not.
Thank you.
More questions? And feel free to come up afterwards if you want, if anything.
I also grew up with the shadow of the Holocaust as an undercurrent in our family. So my father and his parents survived, but in a very different way. But he also didn't talk about anything while we were growing up. And my when my father was maybe in his mid-70s, my stepdaughter wanted to write about him for a class, and so and he talked to her and told
Yeah.
her his story, which was like maybe the first time, because we were always afraid to ask.
Mhm.
Grandmother would talk about it, but
Yeah.
not he. And so that broke the ice,
Mhm.
and then they went also to a Holocaust remembrance event shortly after that, and he
And he spoke.
got into a conversation with somebody, and then they invited him to come back and speak the next time, and then they invited him to come and speak to a school. This was, they were living in Maine at the time, and so that he did that for the first time, and we said, so how did it go? And he said, I don't know, they were very quiet. And my stepdaughter says, oh, they were listening.
Yeah.
And sure enough, a few weeks later, he gets a big envelope full of letters from the kids saying you had asked about that. And they, the kids were very eloquent. They were maybe middle school kids.
I get it, some incredible letters from the
Yeah.
kids, and I'm like, wow, they were
Yeah, this is
listening.
Maine.
They were listening.
Maine was very, I mean, Maine is very, you know, white, very conservative, yes. Though Maine now has a wonderful Holocaust Remembrance Center. And Dad then became very busy speaking for them and going around Maine, talking to different schools there. And then he wrote out his story, and then he would often present it at local Holocaust events. And then eventually they had their second retirement and moved here when he was in his mid to late 80s, and he spoke here while he could. And so, and we have so many similar stories and side stories of other relatives. My dad grew up in Vienna and got out on the Kinder transport, which is a
My
amazing
mother was
story
born in
and of
Vienna.
its own. And he was one of the 5% whose parents were reunited with
Oh,
him
wow.
after that. And he had two cousins from Bratislava in Czechoslovakia who also got out on the Czechoslovakian Kinder transport, who never saw their parents again. And then they grew up in England, and then my father and his parents came to this country eventually.
So were they part of the, what's his name?
No, so the
Harold?
Nicholas Winton.
Yes,
he-
yes.
So
Yeah.
I'm assuming that Czechoslovakia, but I don't know the dates that my father's cousins escaped on.
Yeah.
And my father was on one of the very first trains out of Vienna, so in December of '38. And then, and so still very early, and my grandfather had been in Dachau for a while, and they were able to, my father's sponsored visas for my grandparents, because in those days, they just wanted the Jews out.
Yeah.
So if you could get a
Oh, okay.
visa to like Shanghai or someplace, they would let you out. So this foster father, put up £1,000 to buy tickets for my grandparents to Shanghai, which was a fortune.
Wow.
Yes.
in those
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
And so with that, my grandmother was able to persuade the Gestapo to release my grandfather, and when they got to England, they asked for asylum and reunited with my father. But most of the family, all the extended family, were lost.
Yeah.
And most were from Poland. But my grandmother had one older brother and his wife, and they got involved with the partisans in Yugoslavia. And then another cousin survived, two first cousins survived, and ended up in New York, one of whom worked with the United Nations for many years and taught international law at Harvard, and the other cousin had also a remarkable story of how he had a photography equipment business in, I think it was also Vienna, and he and his wife knew it was time to escape, and they quickly sold their business to this older woman who paid them pennies on the dollar for this business. And he said, "Why do you want this business? What is it to you?" And she said, "Oh, my son used to be in the same business, and he left for America years ago, and I haven't heard from him, but I feel connected to him if I have this business that's like his." So they escaped with their few dollars, stopped with the partisans in Yugoslavia, eventually got to New York, with maybe $10 to their name. And my cousin hit the streets looking for business, speaking no English, and going into every photography equipment store he could find because that's what he knew what to do. And finally, somebody spoke German and said, "Yes, I'll give you a job." So who was that? That was the son of the woman
Oh, wow.
who bought his business.
Oh, my gosh.
So here's another movie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you should speak and tell your story. So, two connections. That other couple that came on Thanksgiving, they had $3 each in their pockets. They came on a Navy ship in the basement of the ship. The next day they went to get jobs in the city, and actually, didn't she? She was the dietitian.
Yeah, at the UN.
At the UN.
Eventually.
Not right away,
Not right.
but eventually.
This is just a reflection. My aunt, so she was brought up by her aunts, and she always talked about how she had this pit in her stomach. And the reason basically was when she was a little girl, her aunts, all they talked about was Jews and gas ovens. So this was before she was 5 years old. You know, so like this is something that just got embedded in her subconscious, basically. And I thought your story, the reason I'm bringing it up is I just thought your comment about the stick story was super powerful, but another example. And it makes me think, I just think it's a powerful lesson to think about. First of all, like within families, you know, these stories that people have about their experiences and what that does to people as they live, but also the relationship, you know, people outside of a Holocaust experience have similar stories going on that none of us know about. You know, you walk down the street and you're like, we don't know what the hell went on with this person. We have no friggin' idea.
Yep.
You know, it could be all roses, but most likely not.
Yeah.
You know, so I just think it's
Or
just
you
a
see
ref-
somebody
Yeah.
with something, oh, wow, boy, do they have it good.
So
You
just
don't know
hearing you
everything.
like talk about,
People are-
right,
Yeah.
but for yourself of like maybe having gotten through that a little bit, having the circle being closed when you talked about asking, you know, and he never had killed somebody. I don't know, I just think it's horrible but interesting at the same time, you know?
When you mentioned that when your father spoke at a school and there was no reaction, I see very little reaction from the kids. I hear it afterwards. They'll write something afterwards,
Sometimes it's okay.
but
Yeah. It's,
you know, we're throwing the kids out the window, and I see, you know, from all of you, or most of you, and if you're not, you're thinking it, I hardly see any reaction from the kids. They watch it, they see it, they all hear it. Or actually, yesterday I was in Burlington, and there were about 40 kids in the class, and one kid had his head down, and lots of times he had his eyes closed. The teacher came over to him partway through and poked him a little bit, and then later on his head was down again. And then when it came for time for questions and answers, he had, I think, more questions than anybody else. He was listening, and then she told me he was sick the week before, and he's exhausted. And okay, I understand. I understand.
reacting.
I don't take
Yeah,
it.
you don't
I
know.
try not to take it personally when.
But not reacting doesn't mean you're not engaged.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Sometimes something is.
No, and
okay.
especially with the kids, they don't want to show it.
Yeah.
They don't want to show it to the others that are. I've just learned that.
Yeah.
You know, I
In a
also
sense.
want to say that, so growing up, I remember coming home from school complaining to my mom about whatever, somebody insulted me, somebody made fun of me, so whatever. The mantra I grew up with was, if that's the worst thing in life that happens to you, you'll be lucky. So, that's my mantra, you know,
Yeah.
just make lemonade.
Yeah.
One more question?
Oh.
Go ahead.
There's still more questions.
Okay, I have a question about,
wanna take a
and
picture of
feel
the
free
picture?
not to answer this because it's a little bit off your topic, but when you see what's going on today and you know, especially with immigrants or you know, people from other places that may not be citizens or may be citizens, and the way ICE. I'm just curious if you feel like your reaction is colored by what you grew up with.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't want to really get into a discussion on
Yeah.
today and whether they should or shouldn't or whatever.
No, I'm just curious if it
and
did.
And it's the other thing, if I do get questions on that from kids, which rarely I do, I pretty much try and say just this, that. I don't really want to get into what today's stuff and try and compare it like some people do or not. That's not my job when I come to the class for an hour and 15 minutes. It's to tell them about the Holocaust and supplement what they're learning about from the Holocaust, not really to get into current stuff.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is